Yeah. I have so much empathy for my human self. I mean, my human self can have a hell of a day on this planet, right? If I didn't have this soul body, I don't know how I would have the perspective I need in order to be of service, to be loving, to be kind, to be happy. I don't know where I'd be without her.
Hey, it's Christine, your host for talking about all things love, liberation, trust, freedom, joy, expansion, creativity, better living in a body, sexuality, psychedelics, and more. Sometimes even quantum physics, sometimes even deep subjects in consciousness, sometimes even how do we know what we know and what is our identity. So I don't know exactly what category to put this in. It's in like health and wellness and sexuality, but I feel like it's evolving to be conversations on applied consciousness studies. And that may be where we go next. I'm not sure. Anyway, we're continuing our series on energy, vibration, intelligences, and how we can change the sort of fundamental building blocks of the way we think and what we project out into the world. And today we're going to talk about subtle intelligence. I'd like to give an extra thank you to the people who amplified last week's episode with Patrick Connor. That was super kind of you. I love the reviews that are coming in. And I think I've been speaking about, what is my core gift in the world. And in part, I think it is uplifting, amplifying, and celebrating other people and their gifts. So it means a lot to me when you pay that back and amplify it even more by sharing it with others and making comments and rating and reviewing and all that stuff, because it means these people that take their time out to have these conversations with us really get the visibility and respect that they deserve. So thank you for that and keep it up. Sometimes I just know. Sometimes I just know has sort of become a meme. Like you can't pinpoint exactly why one person in a crowd feels good and exciting and energizing to you, and another person, even if they're vaguely looking the same and they're also smiling, just feels a little skeevy. There are so many times when you have a sense of intuition, you just know something, but you don't trust it. Have you had that experience? Where you know it, but you sort of make explanations or excuses over your inner knowing. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I've been thinking about the externalization of our knowing from a very young age. We're encouraged to override the things that we know are inherently wrong or inherently good for us in favor of what the culture or the family deems to be appropriate or right. And in this way, many of us even cease believing ourselves and seeking validation of the things that we know from outside sources, from books, from scientific method, when actually in your genetic inheritance, in your cells, is a whole lot of knowing that has been inherited as the peak wisdom of all of evolution from far back to the second single-celled organism, I suppose, all the way through the animals and all the way through the early hominids and all the way through the various cultures and lineages that you have come from. You've inherited the genius, the best of all the learning so far in human history up until your own very perfect birth. So if you have all of this direct knowing and capacity, why is it that we are often blind and can't see the things that are right in front of us, or we're not clear on something that you think would be crystal clear to anyone else? And I want to just speak to that today as we prepare for this episode with the amazing Kathleen Joy on a term she's coined as subtle intelligence, the trusting of our intuition, our clairvoyance, our claircognizance, our clairaudience, and a new word for me, our clairgustation, which is like a clear sense of taste that can pop up at sometimes. I just have this taste in my mouth. So before I get into the conversation with Kathy, which is super sweet, on building your own subtle intelligence skills, on finding new possibilities and new creativity through trusting your subtle intelligence, on directing yourself into more coherent choices, I want to read to you something, well, a few quotes actually, from a remarkable thinker, Robert Anton Wilson, confessionally, I think this might be a defensive move on my part because I want you to think of me as a serious person and a reliable narrator on these topics. So I'm putting this out there because I think I'm anticipating a great deal of skepticism on the idea of subtle intelligence. So here's what Wilson has to say. Every fact of science was once damned. Every invention was considered impossible. Every discovery was a nervous shock to some orthodoxy. Every artistic innovation was denounced as fraud and folly. The entire web of culture and progress, everything on earth that is man-made and not given to us by nature, is the concrete manifestation of some person's refusal to bow to authority, with a capital A, by the way. We would own no more, know no more, and be no more than the first ape-like hominids if it were not for the rebellious, the recalcitrant, and the intransigent. As Oscar Wilde truly said, disobedience was man's original virtue. He also wrote about intelligence and said that intelligence is the capacity to receive, decode, and transmit information efficiently. Stupidity is blockage of this process at any point. So bigotry, ideologies, etc. block the ability to receive. Robotic reality tunnels block the ability to decode or integrate new signals. Censorship blocks transmission. Belief is the death of intelligence. As soon as one believes a doctrine of any sort or assumes certitude, one stops thinking actively about that aspect of existence. So the work we're going to discuss today invites you to bring a much broader set of intelligences to bear than the ones we're used to relying on. And they invite you to trust your own inner knowing and perhaps zoom out a little bit and understand that there is more going on at any given time in us and in between us and in between us and the rest of creation than we ever imagined. All right. My guest today is Kathleen Joy. She's the founder and CEO of LumiereWork, and she says she's on a mission to ignite the joy and power of transformation in every leader and team. For over 2 decades, she's been pioneering growth through holistic intelligence, where you bring your whole self to the world. I love that, by the way, because it doesn't force us to split the material and the spiritual or bring our creativity and our play here and our seriousness here, but to be our whole selves all the time, all the places we show up on earth. She believes that everyone has the resources and intelligences to get what they desire, but that few know how to seize them, and has developed a methodology that gives people the tools they need to touch those skills. She has a master's from CIIS in organizational behavior, and she has all kinds of training, master practitioner in NLP, as well as a 4-year training in energy studies with the McKay method. Plus, she's written a book called Empowerment Amidst Chaos, which you might enjoy. We talk a little bit about that at the end of the show. And she is teaching creative leadership now at Stanford University, a pretty potent program. I was lucky enough to experience one of her in-person workshops with a group of some of the most powerful women I know, and it was just absolutely delightful. So we start by talking about what subtle intelligence is and how it includes the forms of intelligence that we already know about, but it sort of goes to the next level and invites us to a more holistic knowing. Just so that I can kind of lead this in a little bit, like we had this movement in, towards emotional intelligence way back in the 80s, 90s, where, that was a shock to a lot of people, like that was considered intelligence. It had primarily been right. The mind. It had been IQ, yes. And people were like, oh, you're being so soft. You're being so squishy. Yeah. What do you mean emotional intelligence? But that this recognition of multiple kinds of intelligences that has emerged over the years, this is a whole nother dimension, which seems to really speak to people who are either by nature very sensitive and haven't yet, clouded over it, or are like everyone has these essential capacities, but they've been sort of society or acculturated out of them. So we're looking at subtle intelligence in the sense of coming home and becoming aware in the context of a larger thread of evolution as to what constitutes human intelligence and skill. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think it's brilliant. Yeah. I mean, what we've done is we've entered a scientific age, right? And so that dominated the conversation, and that also created what was right or wrong, or what was verifiable or not. And if you think about it, we were here a long, long time before that movement began. If you look at indigenous wisdoms, there was so much that they already knew. It just wasn't, quote unquote, proven in a theoretical manner or in a lab, or, it's just that we just went a little bit too far. We've run the gamut of, I think, of the scientific mind. And I love that you bring up emotional intelligence, because I remember people going, oh, yeah, and I have to learn those soft skills, like with disdain. And it's like, oh, my gosh. Kindness, right, that's a real drag. If you have to be kind or empathetic, oh, good God. Did you practice that for 5 minutes yesterday? Because, like it was funny how people were when that first came about. But now, it's recognized as one of the second most important competencies you need as a leader. But there's more. There's more.
There's more?
And
really?
I think, oh my gosh, yeah.
Wait, there's more. In the Ginsu knife of psychological and spiritual tools, we have another gift for you.
We have another gift for you, and that is called your subtle intelligence. And just so people know what we're talking about, I coined that word a while back because I was frustrated with how people would respond to words like intuition or energy or your vitality or psychic phenomenon or metaphysics or blah, blah, blah. People were like, what do you mean you're chakra? Like, get out of town. What's wrong? What did you have for breakfast? Like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, okay, so maybe we don't know about this, but it doesn't make it wrong.
Right.
Do you know how far the energy from your heartbeat can be measured?
Right.
Right now, only about 50 feet, but that's only because the instruments aren't strong enough to measure it further, right? Heart math and all the beautiful work they've done with that. There's so much that we don't know yet. But when I think about subtle intelligence, the younger, I have, my daughters are 22 and 24. They are dialed in. Like, they understand it. I don't know if they just weren't ever educated out of it or if it's more part of their generation, but I hear kids talk about, oh, I was channeling this and I got this hit about that. And, oh, yeah, I got a really clear message, in my sleep, in my dreams, I saw this. And, oh, I'm recognizing this pattern that's happening over and over again. And I think it means something, or I keep seeing this particular sign or this word, or like they're paying attention in a different way.
Well, your children also had you as a mother.
That's true. We used to chase leprechauns.
I say that in a flip manner, but I do agree with you. I see that also in my offspring. The spring, as John and I used to call them. Instead of our children, we would call them the spring. Yeah. And I think that's funny in a lot of ways, because it is like the well of the next generation, the well of life is coming through them as an unending spring of freshness. And they are different. They're more tolerant. They're more gender tolerant. They're more racially tolerant. They don't see age in the same way. They're really, it's an amazing generation.
Well, that perhaps some of the subconscious mind has become more conscious with them, or I don't know how to describe it, but the invisible world is kind of what we talk about in subtle intelligence. And I think about it as like peripheral vision. Now, if you're staring at something like a scientific mind or the real cognitive logical thinking, which is extremely important and valid, right? But it's like a sharp focus of something right ahead of you. It's like you have your eye on that thing and you're pursuing the logic and the mechanics of that thing. And what happens with subtle intelligence is we soften the gaze and we open the field so that we can see things that are to the left of us and to the right of us and that are above and below us and potentially even behind us, right? And that being able to open up for more data, I think, is where our next frontier is. And when I was referring earlier to that little bit of chaos and the change and the breaking of patterns, I think that's what the opportunity is to soften ourselves into this space and see what's available, because it's extremely creative and we can solve complex issues in partnership with this type of intelligence. And the thing about being open in that manner is it also allows you to start understanding how connected you are with others, right? And that we are, in fact, not so different. Good and subtle intelligence will create empathy. It's one of the things it's sort of a byproduct of that, in addition to other things. But it's one of my favorite places to play. Some people will call it imagination. And imagination is actually your doorway into subtle intelligence. It's part of the way to get there. What happens is the more you start to learn and trust and build your muscle around subtle intelligence, you'll start getting information that you are just not clever enough to make up, right? Like sometimes I get information or I hear or see things or feel things that there's just no way I could have imagined. But I had to imagine my way at the very beginning to train my sensing to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm feeling I had a hit around perception, like the organs of perception, and that we've been biasing towards the eyes mostly, and then the ears, and then it sort of diminishes from there. But that there is an organ of perception that is almost like a geospatial perception. That humans actually have magnetic field perception in their capacity. And then also like a sensational perception of energy. Like, how do you know when someone's sneaking up behind you? It's not audio, that there's something in our energetic field that is also able to feel other energies commingling. Like you walk into a particular house and there's just something in it that's like not right for you. Or you walk into another space and you're like, oh, this is completely relaxing to my nervous system. But that there are non-metered, like we haven't figured out, as you said earlier, how to instrument these six senses, seven senses of perception. And so I love that you're now moving into like what are some exercises to awaken your awareness of these things, and also possibly trusting them, right? Like the sense of self-doubt, like I'm just delusional or I'm making it up or something like that. I think that sits deeply in a lot of us. So let's talk some more about ways to open it up, and then also how to trust yourself more.
Well, I think we should start with the trust question, because that's probably the number one thing people ask me about, right? They're like, how can I trust this, right? Because sometimes I'm wrong. Yeah, sometimes you will be wrong, because this is not absolute data and information. And it's the one thing that I get really a little nervous about when people think they've received a message and they think that's the only message. It's like, well, here's the thing, is that you are prone to bias. You still have a human brain and you have patterns within that. And so you are prone to a certain bias that could happen, or you become a little bit overconfident in your perception. Like some people think, oh, I always know. Like I had a grandparent who was always like, oh, honey, I know it's going to rain. I know it's going to rain. I know it's going to rain. And yeah, within the month it was going to rain. But, she had this idea that she always would know things in advance. But you can get a little overconfident with it. And you can also kind of measure it. So when if you're making a decision, you can do it an intuitive way. Note what your intuitive choice would be, and then you can do it in a data-driven way. And then when you make your choice, see how it turns out. But you do have to pay attention, because it's not an absolute right or wrong. Like, I don't want people hearing the voice of God. Well, I do, actually. I think that'd be pretty cool. But I don't want them to think that if they're hearing something or they're sensing something or they're seeing it, that it's an absolute truth. You do have to test it and verify. And that's part of the learning.
First of all, I want to just agree with what you're saying, that there's a quality of, just like in developing any skill, like testing it, understanding the delicate flavors of each of these intuitions or these moments of seeing that seem to come out of something other than the five senses. Like there's a progressive learning about what's true for you and what's real and what's a false signal. And for me, that comes from the body.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Like if my body is super contracted around a topic, or if it's tense around a topic, or if the insight doesn't bring relaxation, I question it. And then also if the insight or hit comes with an external gaze, like it's not inwardly referential or coming sourced from the middle, but like it has an expectation of how others would react, then I also know that it's not true. So those are 2 tests that I've been using. What are some others?
You're talking about actually using a clairsentient language, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things we haven't talked about yet is what is the language of subtle intelligence?
Oh, yeah. What's clairsentience?
Well, clairsentience is when you feel, right? And it's being able to feel yourself, to feel sensations that are coming to you. And then it's also the ability to feel into others. And when you talk about your body wisdom, right, there's a little bit of a line here between what is actual physical intelligence coming to you. Like I feel this tension in my stomach, or I feel the hair on the back of my neck go up. That's very physical intelligence. But you can also get a sense, and that's the language you would say, the sensing or a feeling, or something that gets activated when you're in a physical setting. Like clairsentient works very well in nature, for example. So if people want to practice their subtle intelligence, they could go for a walk in nature and notice how are they feeling and how is that progressing while they're going on their walk. Are they noticing their breathing deepening? Are they noticing a calm? Are they noticing the actual temperature around them? That's their physical intelligence. And then it kind of morphs into, on that continuum, into a clairsentient, where you start to feel a little bit differently at a different level. So that's one way to do it. Clairvoyant, people may have heard that before. And clairvoyant, it's an interesting, I grew up having a Halloween costume, dressing up as a roaming, wandering woman with a crystal ball, right? And big hoop earrings, because that was a cool thing for us back when we were little, is to dress in these big skirts and to play this role. And we would run around and tell people their fortunes, and they would give us candy. It was a good gig while it lasted. But when we think about what is really clairvoyance is the ability to perceive visual information or images that are not visible to your physical eye. So maybe as you're looking at something, you'll notice all of a sudden a little extra light or something flickered in and out. Or if your dreams are a very good version of clairvoyance, right? And somebody who wants to sort of develop the language in that, if they have an aptitude towards visual information in their normal 5 senses, clairvoyance might be a great way for them to enter into training their subtle intelligence, starting working with images and metaphoric images, sacred geometry, painting, doing art, right? Those kind of things can kind of stimulate that particular sense. And then it could go on to, the clairaudience and clairgustative and clairsmelling. The way you smell has a word too. I can't remember it at the moment. But there's all sorts of ways, like I would say, kind of pick your language or notice which language you flirt with already. And then just have a play date with it. Have a subtle intelligence play date. Go spend 20 minutes and allowing it, leading with your imagination, and then allow it to morph into something else. The most concrete way that I learned was working with physical bodies. My teacher, Bear McKay, I studied energy healing with her for several years. And I remember our very first class, she would have somebody lay down on the table, and she's like, all right, now I want you to feel their liver. And she would put her hand right on their center of their body and have us feel into a liver. And I was like, what? Like, how am I kind of know what that looks like when my grandmother cooked it, but that's disgusting. Like, I don't know how to feel a liver. And so she had us just start imagining. It's like, well, what do you know from anatomy? And what do you remember from this? And start picturing it. And then what would happen is we had to go to another body and put our hand in the same place. And I thought I was going to imagine the exact same thing. And all of a sudden I noticed it was different. And then I went to a third body. And it was like, wait a minute. This one's not the same than the first two. Like, what is, and my curiosity got a little triggered about what's so different. What am I sensing that's different? And that's kind of a fun way to get into it.
And you do some checking. Do you do checking? Once I was with you and you had us do an exercise, a partnered exercise to train this skill and to get some check-in with the other person. Do you remember that?
I do. It's, there's very simple things that you can do with with a friend or a partner. And it would be sitting in a quiet state, maybe doing a little breath work or a short meditation, just so you really relax your nervous system and start to opening up. Because subtle intelligence is like a deer. If you make a sudden loud noise, it's gone. You have to be in a relaxed state. You're alert and relaxed. And what happens is that you can sit with somebody else and you can say, all right, Christine, we're just going to take a few breaths and I'm just going to tell you what I'm sensing. And what you'll notice first is perhaps your own judgment in your head going, oh, what if I get it wrong? Or I don't want to tell her the wrong thing. Or what if I make a mistake? And you'll notice, oh, that's interference. That is not subtle intelligence. That's my judgment. So I'm going to put that aside. And I'm going to say again, let me just sense into you for a few minutes. And I like to imagine myself sort of in that person's physical environment, meaning in their body or in their auric field. And I just start noticing what I'm sensing. Very typically, this is why I think it's nice to know the languages, but some people go in and they feel first and they'll go, oh, I'm really feeling a lot of tension right now. And my back is sore and my knee even aches a little bit. And you can just kind of carry on and say what you're sensing. Or you might say, it feels like you're not alone. There might be other people with you right now. Like maybe you have a lot of people on your mind, but I see an elderly woman and I see snow around her. I'm not quite sure what this is about. And you might think you're a little bit crazy saying this out loud, but that's okay. You're just practicing. Or you know what I'm hearing? I'm hearing this chant. I keep hearing this chant and this mantra. Or I'm noticing my body wants to sway. Like you'll just start noticing what is not your normal perception, right? You report it out to your partner and they'll go, wow, all right. Well, I was talking to the caretaker of my grandmother, and it looks like I'm going to need to get on a plane and perhaps say goodbye to her. And I have a tremendous amount of tension, and it's in my lower back. And what else, and they can go on and explain their story. But when they feed back to what resonated, it probably won't be everything you said, but there might be a few things that you did say that you caught that you couldn't have known otherwise. And that is a really nice practice to help you start gaining a little bit of confidence in a safe way with someone. And then you switch so they can do the same thing and you can get a little reading also.
Yeah, that's the exercise. It was potent.
Oh, it's a great exercise because you get real quick validation from somebody else. I spent 3/4 of my life not thinking I was crazy, right? Because I get so much information from a room, from a group, from a person, from an environment. And what I started realizing when I started to respect what I was understanding, I had more control over it. And then I was able to use it in ways that were actually helpful for myself and others. So we all have this intelligence. We all have it. It shows up differently in terms of language. It can show up differently in the way we perceive, right? Well, I mentioned channeling. Some people might like divination. Some people do automatic writing. That's another great exercise. I love writing to my higher self in the morning. And I always start out with, hello, hello, hello. And just to make sure they know it's them I'm after, right? So I always give her 3 hellos. And then I just kind of picture her just a little bit outside of my body. And I'm like, I would love your guidance for today. What do you think we should be up to? Or, this happened yesterday and I'd love your viewpoint on it. And I write it as a dialogue. So I might say something and then I write immediately the response that comes to me. And it's always a different voice. It always is a little smarter than I am. It's fantastic. automatic writing is really an interesting way to get information.
Love that exercise. I also love that you can distinguish between your higher self and the normal workaday self in some way.
Yeah. I have so much empathy for my human self. I mean, my human self can have a hell of a day on this planet, right? And if I did not have this higher self or my soul body is how I think of her, or it. It feels feminine to me, but if I didn't have this soul body, I don't know how I would have the perspective I need in order to be of service, to be loving, to be kind, to be happy. I don't know where I'd be without her.
I think speaking to your higher self is a beautiful invitation to tap into our deeper wisdom and knowing. And as I understand it, you've been working with this modality and with a bunch of archetypal work with women and men who are CEOs of major corporations. Can you talk a little bit about what brings them to you and then what kind of outcomes they are seeing from bringing this into their, as you put it, your human life?
Yeah. Well, when I'm working in business, we work with all four intelligences. And, if anybody's thinking about, I want to go out and be an intuitive CEO, it's like, well, maybe. But I always approach them with whichever language is predominant. So maybe it's cognitive intelligence. So we'll have a strategic conversation. We'll work on some things. We have to learn to trust each other. And then they'll start to open up emotionally, and I can get them physically relaxed. And the simple things that I'll start to work with them on are typically around decision-making. And decision-making and problem-solving are the two places in business where subtle intelligence works really well. And there's a number of different exercises I've done with them or with their teams. Sometimes they know we're working on intuitive practices, and sometimes they just think it's under the guise of creativity. It doesn't really matter as long as they get to approach the content. And some of the outcomes I've had are when people, during the pandemic was a really good time to bring it up because people were stuck and they were starting to go into like this default mode and going back to just what they knew how to do, and they just would do the same thing harder, faster, and they were really burnt out. And starting to pay attention to the subtle intelligence as well as the physical allowed them to start to open up, get a little more data, start sensing different patterns. Subtle intelligence is very good at patterns, seeing what repeats or what seems to be the meta conversation that's happening. You're with a group of people and you start noticing all the unsaid things and you start feeling what's not being spoken. And then I would perhaps teach one of my clients how to talk about the sacred cows or, and bring what's not spoken to the table. Or how do you gently acknowledge? There was a project team that I was working with. They were really upset about some of the work that they were doing because they felt they were kind of in competition with another group within the organization. And, they wanted to make sure that their side of the project looked better than the other side. And the idea was eventually to come to cooperation, but no one in the meeting ever actually said that, but you could sense it, right? And so working with the leader, I would just do things like, well, how are you feeling right now? Like, wow, I just feel like things are off. Like, this isn't making sense. Okay, so what if they don't actually make sense? What else are you noticing? And, that's where you get into more of, and it can blend into all four intelligences, but subtle intelligence is at the table. That's the main thing. It doesn't need to be the only thing, but it needs to be included, right? So they might be looking at it and going, wow, one corner seems really dense with a lot of energy and noise, and then this other side seems really quiet and almost diffused. Well, that's subtle information, right? And it's like, okay, well, what do we need to do to bring that into balance? What might we say? Or do we need to shift team members around? Or is there something, that we need to bring up to help to resolve this? But helping them to notice, I would say 3/4 of the time I'm working with them, it's all about noticing. And then it's about you notice, and then you practice and you practice and you practice. And there's all sorts of small skills that I teach them in. And some of them, I have some clients now that are just like, oh, can you do one of those energy sessions with me? And I'll just give them sort of a relaxing, energetic experience where their whole body can decompress, and I can get to a deeper conversation with them than they would normally have in their day. Because I will perceive information and I'll feed it back to them and they'll go, yeah, that's exactly right. And it's something that might be just slightly subconscious, but through our practice or our conversation, our session, it becomes conscious for them. And that's where, how subtle intelligence can work.
Yeah, and you may become conscious of it, and then you have another step in deciding whether to act on it or whether you have the capacity to act on it. But at least you have this additional data set or energetic piece of information. I'm thinking a lot as you're speaking also about family constellations therapy, where the presumption in that therapy is that everything the world needs to know about you is projected in your energy field, that all the stories you carry with you and all the beliefs you carry with you are in your energy body, and that when you stand up and ask others to mimic your family story, they can do it just by sensing their own body and arranging themselves in a pattern. And you will see a tableau that represents your inner life that's uncannily accurate. Or the idea that another thing on that realm is that the vibration you're operating from is always being broadcast into the world, and that it acts in two ways. One is to draw those experiences that mimic that to you, and the other way is to cloud your perception of what's really happening, to bias towards that frequency. And so there's a lot of things that are out in the world in addition to the sort of personal cultivation of the skill that in your daily life for more potency, and as we started out, for more creative input into what wants to be born in the world now, what wants to be created, what beauty and love and wisdom and clarity wants to be nurtured. Like, we can use it in that way. And then we also have these other modalities that have already been really understanding that your energetic imprint is carried with you like a neon sign when you walk through the world. So you might as well get conscious about it, and then also get conscious about reading others.
Yes, I agree with that. And the thing that I think is one of the more beautiful outputs of subtle intelligence is that you understand that you are they and they are you. And it's a we, right? That somebody might have a distinct energetic field, but when you get a bigger picture of what's happening, you understand that we're all connected. And I believe it's when we start to really understand how we are connected on an energetic level. Like, we can feel loss of someone we don't even know, right? There's ways that we are so connected to each other that we may start to have more empathy and start caring for each other in a different way. I have hope.
We're going to say, we have confidence. I have ultimate confidence in the way humanity and the beautiful planet and biosphere we are intricately made of keeps reinventing itself. And I have no doubt that that's what's happening now.
I think in a certain way this fits in with subtle intelligence, because when there is a certain amount of chaos available and breakdown of systems and change occurring at rapid and complex paces, I believe there's opportunity for tremendous and infinite possibilities. And when we start using our full set of intelligences, because I believe that we're cognitively, we have amazing minds, we have these emotional bodies that are so incredible and can create also energy. We have our physical bodies, which we were talking about, that they're amazing and constant sources of wonder about the information they give us and how we can hold them. And even we were just talking about aging, there's all sorts of things that we can do well with them, and data we can get from them. And then subtle intelligence, I feel like, is having it's about to have its moment because of the openings that are happening. So I'm pretty excited about the world today.
I love that. That's not the most common response to the condition of the world that I hear. I hear a lot of fear out there. I hear a lot of fear. So tell me what you see. What do you see emerging and arising for us?
Well, the thing is, there is a lot of fear, but I also feel like fear is just a very well-worn old pattern that does not serve except for the few people who would like to use it to control others. And fear in general, I'm not saying that there's not legitimate fear, that there's not things that can make us fearful. I think fear has we have an amazing history with it, right? And if we respect it and keep it in proportion, it can be of service to us and it can help us be of service to others. But there's more than that. When I look out at the world, I see there's a lot of amazing things happening. We just don't talk about them, and we don't celebrate them, and we don't acknowledge them enough in each other. Like the fact that you are at this moment on this journey discovering these beautiful plants and their history, and you're diving in to understand like what is that they're trying to bring forth in the world, right? Just something as simple as that is a really amazing, beautiful, life-affirming thing. So anything that starts affirming life, for me, is good. And when we try to shift from that fear mindset, you can't affirm anything. All you can do is contract, right? It's preservation, it's contraction in its hardest core. And then that shuts off all the vital energies of our life. So I just feel like when we're meeting chaos and when there's a lot of things we can't understand that are going on in the world that seem incredibly traumatic or unthinkable. I'm not being Pollyanna, but there's opportunity in that for something else to arise other than fear. And that's where the creative space comes in. When there's a crack in the sidewalk, you could have a dandelion coming through there. In my neighborhood, it's agave plants. Like there's all sorts of things that can happen in a crack. And mankind and humankind and womankind and binary kinds of all kinds, we're amazing creatures when we use our creative intelligence. And I just feel like we're getting an open invitation right now to put it to work.
I love what you're saying. There's an old argument of the battle between Eros, or the love of life, and Thanatos, the draw towards death, that has been sort of on the table for thousands of years in philosophy, and that the draw towards death manifests itself in fighting and in warfare and investing in all of those things, but that the force of life wanting itself is stronger, and it will always be stronger. And so you look like at those little pointers, like Mr. Rogers saying, look for the helpers. Every time that there's some crisis, there's this huge amount of energy and forces going into peacemaking, into healing, into repairing damage that's been done. And that's sort of one place to place one's attention. But I have a general sense of collective exhaustion at the mass aggression that's happening in the world because we're seeing it all at once. And that in that is even a pointer, like it's pointing us and saying, this is how you are behaving as a species, as an organism. Is this how you want to live? And in that query, in that, like it's in your face. And then absolutely not. Thank you very much, divinity. I do not want to live like that, nor does anyone I know. We want to focus on our dandelions and our agave plants and our children and our artwork and our creative projects and like becoming full in ourselves. And it's time. It's time.
I think it's happening. I do. I just think that we're not paying attention enough to how it's happening. Like, I think of it as, a little light. And that I love that song, This Little Light of Mine. Yep. Right? And I think about that. It's like, if I can get my light just a little brighter today, who's going to notice that? Who's going to need that? Who might get reflected in that? Who might enhance that light? Like, there's so much possibility of walking out into the world and going, I know it's crazy, but I am not adding to the insanity. I will be a little love warrior, little love advocate. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to start at home, which means within myself. And when I think about within myself, that's where I go to subtle intelligence. To be honest, that's my home base, right? So when I'm back into my subtle intelligence, I understand a lot more. Like my world perspective, my universal, my cosmic perspective opens up. And when you have a larger perspective you can come from, you have different choices. There's more options. There's more possibility at hand. And I just want to live my life in more possibilities so that I don't miss that little opportunity where, a little voice says, no, actually, you should turn left. And I turn left and there's a neighbor who needs help to get out of her car. Or that little moment where I'm like, gosh, I'm really thinking I should contact so-and-so. And you do it and they're like, oh my God, this was the best time to hear from you. I was having the roughest day. And you're like, okay. Yeah, this works. This is what this is about.
Love will win. Eros will win. Life will win.
Life will win. I agree with you, my friend.
Hey, if somebody wanted to learn more about cultivating their own subtle intelligences, I saw that draft of that workbook. Is that coming out anytime soon?
Well, I do have retreats that I do on it. I like to introduce people by having a felt experience. I do believe that you will learn very, very, very quickly by being immersed in it. But I do have a book that introduces people into navigating chaos if they find themselves at a moment where they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? And how am I going to meet this moment? And that's called Empowerment Amidst Chaos. That's available for people right now. I do believe I'm going to put that into a interactive workshop soon. And the subtle intelligence, there's a lot of beautiful teachers out there. There really are. And if I would say, go away from this conversation being a little bit curious, going, okay, really? Are there really infinite possibilities? Is it really possible that something wonderful could come out of this moment? Let me go into a bookstore, let me browse, and let me see if I can find one thing that will help me feel a little more enlightened on this topic. Because there's amazing people, amazing work out there.
Well, you're amazing. That book, by the way, has a wonderful device in that the dialogue is with a customer service agent from the universe. And I think it's such a fantastic way to be exposing these themes of how to live, how to be fully human.
Right. Well, sometimes you need a meta perspective.
Thank you so much. To my beautiful, joyful, creative, artistic mommy, you can find another show we did together way back when my book Reverence was released. Kathy contributed a beautiful ritual on the empty nest and sort of how to navigate your way during the time when your children, anybody who's had children knows, it's such a devotional and significant amount of life energy. And sometimes there's a strange feeling when they leave. So you can go back and listen for that episode also if you enjoyed this. And find Kathy at LumiereWork.com. And I will put all those links in the show notes as always. Thank you for your intelligence and your kindness and all of the things you bring to the world.
So my pleasure. I love, love, love engaging in the creative conversation with you and with all your listeners.
Well, I hope you leave this episode with a commitment to making some subtle intelligence playdates with yourself, or practicing moving through a room and just noticing how you respond to different people's energies and getting curious about why that is, and cultivating this inner knowing and trusting of your own experience. Maybe I'll see you at one of Kathy's workshops on cultivating subtle intelligence together. Wherever you're receiving this, wherever you are in the world, may this day be full of clarity, self-trust, and if you just know, I hope you can take action on that knowing swiftly and painlessly. All love, all the time.